Welcome to Reader 2 Standing By, Episode 15. I'm Wedge,
And I'm Wraith 14.
and we're so happy to have you join us in our journey through the X-Wing series of Star Wars stories from the old expanded universe. This month, we're starting what we like to call Season 2 of X-Wing, the books by Michael A. Stackpole and Aaron Alston that have a majority focus on the X-Wing characters and their development. The first of these books is the second book in the 19-volume New Jedi Order series, Dark Tide 1 Onslaught. Spoiler alert, we will spoil every book we've covered so far and the entire book we're reading today. We do have a huge reveal this episode, so please stay tuned for an incredible find by Wraith after we finish our discussion of the main summary of the book. So, before we get into the meat of the book, as always, let's do our briefing on the context for this story. Out of Universe, Dark Tide 1 Onslaught was published in February of 2000, about 4 months after the first book in the New Jedi Order series, Vector Prime, in October of 1999, and about 5 months before the next book, Dark Tide 2 Ruin, also, of course, by Michael A. Stackpole, in June of 2000. This year is the 20th anniversary of the Dark Tide books, so that's exciting.
25th.
What did I say?
20th.
Oh, 25th. This is the 25th anniversary of the Dark Tide books, so that's pretty exciting. Fun that we're talking about books a quarter century after they're released, even though they're dreaded high-end fiction. So oftentimes those books are forgotten in cheap bins, sold for a quarter, and only a few people read them. But thankfully, I think the New Jedi Order is often very much remembered, and the X-Wing series, we do our best to keep it alive. As we mentioned last episode about the comic series Union, that series released the fourth and final issue the same month that Dark Tide 1 was published, February 2000. So there's some fun New Jedi Order setup in that with mentions of new Jedi characters like Worth Skitter and I think Ganner, and Corran's children, Valen. I don't think Giselle is mentioned in Union, but she is definitely mentioned here in Onslaught. Chewbacca number 3, the third in the comic anthology series of tributes/elegies to Chewbacca after his death in Vector Prime, was published in March 2000, so the month after Dark Tide Onslaught. And there was a story featuring Wedge talking about his relationship with Chewbacca, which was written by the guy who did the script for The Phantom Affair, Darko Makan, and it was drawn by a guy who did a ton of the X-Wing comics, John Nadeau. So it doesn't have direct Stackpole or Alston involvement, so we're not covering it directly here, but it does have a very strong X-Wing flavor. But it's kind of a small story, and it's definitely kind of sad because of the whole nature of the Chewbacca series saying goodbye to Chewbacca as a character because the New Jedi Order decided to kill him off.
Always check your snow speeders for any unexpected passengers.
And be careful when you set down because an angry Wookiee may come after you. Outside of these projects, Star Wars was mostly focused on the prequel era, with a lot of Phantom Menace stories being published, like the Jedi Apprentice, middle grade series about Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon, the series that would become Republic about the Jedi in this era, etc. In universe, everything that was happening in 25 years after the Battle of Yavin was pretty much the New Jedi Order. So you have your prequel short story, Boba Fett, A Practical Man by Karen Travis, telling what's going on with the Mandalorians at the time. The Invasion comic series by Tom Taylor, exploring a different part of the Vong War in a different system. And the Chewbacca comic series anthology, which, as I mentioned, is trying to say goodbye to the Great Wookiee. With all that context for Dark Tide 1 Onslaught, let's get into the meat of the story with our summary. Onslaught opens when the anti-imperial pirate Urias Zaxxon and his Nebulon B frigate, the Freelance, attempts to pull one last job against Imperial shipping, only to have their ambush ambushed by the Yuuzhan Vong, badly damaging the pirates as they flee. On Coruscant, Leia Organa Solo pleads with Chief of State Borsk Phalia and the New Republic Senate for a quick and decisive response to the Vong invasion. But with only a few allies like Senator Eligos Akla, Phalia and his political allies like Senator Pwoe see Leia's warnings as a ploy for her to regain power and claim the Vong are no threat. Eligos accompanies Leia in his own investigations to the Outer Rim. Colonel Gavin Darklighter, new commander of Rogue Squadron after Wedge, Tycho, Corran, and most of the older rogues retired after Vision of the Future, in which peace was brought between the New Republic and the Empire, or Imperial Remnant, works with Bothan Admiral Traced Crayfay to hunt for the Vong and develop new tactics against their terrifying organic technology with the flagship Bothan assault cruiser, the Ralroast.
As Luke Skywalker sends the Jedi out on missions designed to learn more about the Vong and the New Republic's readiness to meet their threat, Corran Horn, along with the young Jedi Ganna Raiso, a disciple of Kip Duran, Corran's old rival, travels to Bimio to check on archaeologists who may have had some contact with the Vong. Gavin and the rogues find the pirate Urias Zaxxon, don't know how you pronounce that, and the survivors of the Vong ambush, and they rescue them to get intel, as much intel as possible on the Vong. Leia Eligos, Leia's daughter Jaina, and the Vong survivor and scientist Denny Qui from Vector Prime make their first stop at the Outer Rim agrarian world of Agamor, which appears in Wraith Squadron, and they get warnings of incoming refugees and attacks.
Corran and Ganner make contact with the archaeologists on Bimiel and learn that the leader, Dr. Anki Pace, is a former Merlist, which is the planet in the Phantom Affair, archaeology student and a friend of Koyu Komad, who was the Rogue's chief mechanic during the Zinj campaign and is now married to Nrin Vakil. They discover they found 40 to 50-year-old Vong skeletons on this planet. Gavin Darklighter and the Rogues have their first brush with the Vong as they dogfight a squadron of coral skippers, nicknamed Skips, and take heavy losses to destroy them. Leia, Eligos, Jaina, and Danny arrive at Lando Calrissian's mining facility on Debrillion, which was attacked in Vector Prime, to find it being slowly worn down by Vong attacks.
I'll just mention that we're focusing on the X-Wing and X-Wing adjacent elements, so there's other plot lines, such as with Mara, Jade, Skywalker, and Anakin Solo, and things Jason are doing that we're not covering in this. So Corran and Ganner discover a Yuuzhan Vong camp and witness them enslaving and murdering some of the humans there. Gavin and Admiral Crayfay meet Leia and Lando as they assist the Debrillion evacuation, and Jaina joins Rogue Squadron as Rogue 11. The Rogues battle a Star Destroyer-sized Vong capital ship, with Jaina and her wingmate Annie Capstan doing some damage before they're forced to jump to Dantooine, where Mara Jade Skywalker and Anakin Solo are on a mission.
Corran and Ganner debate whether to try to bioengineer a solution to the Vong invasion or fight them directly, but realize two archaeologists are missing. Luke and Jason rescue Mara and Anakin from invading Vong troops on Dantooine, and they all head to meet Leia, Eligos, and Jaina to begin the Battle of Dantooine. Gavin briefs Jaina and the Rogues, the other pilots they've collected, and Eligos for the ground cover mission they'll be running. The pilots take off first, meaning skips in the air. Jaina encounters a huge Vong ground vehicle, which she nicknames a range, mountain range, for its size and lumpy rock shape.
Corrin and Gander find the two missing archaeologists, and through his energy-absorbing power and mental projection abilities, Corrin figures out how to release them from the Vong restraints, but two of their warriors arrive. Corrin fights those Vong and manages to beat them both, but is gravely injured, so Gander rescues him as the archaeologist team escapes the planet. Luke coordinates with Gavin and the Rogues to destroy the range by pushing its gravity void onto itself with the Force, sucking it into a mini black hole. As the Battle of Dantooine ends, Rogue Squadron has been cut in half. Gavin, Krau, Neri, Aelin, Jaina, and Annie, and we'll have more on some of those names later, are the only survivors. A Vong cruiser comes and uses its gravity powers to block hyperspace like an interdictor, but the Ra Roost and Victory Star Destroyer, the Karuska Fire, come back from Agamar and drive it off, allowing the New Republic fleet to escape to Agamar.
Gavin, Admiral Crafey, Leia, and Elegos are summoned by Phalia and the Advisory Council. While Phalia and the Council remain stubborn in denying the threat, Crafey threatens to mutiny and take huge chunks of the New Republic fleet with him unless the Senate acts correctly and declares war on the Vong, sends aid to the refugees, and lets the military fight without micromanagement. Gavin heads back to his office and finds Wedge Antilles and Tycho Selchu have returned to fight the Vong. So, our after-action report, our analysis section, let's start with the question. The X-Wing series is labeled clearly with X-Wing on the title. Why are we covering the New Jedi Order Dark Tide series?
Well, if you look at the cover, you see X-Wings. And it's a very neat cover at that. We're also specifically focusing on the ones by Stackpole and Austin. There were no, as Wedge is fond of having a Zahn inclusion in NJO, but so no Zahn Austin Stackyverse for this. But as far as Zahn's part, but we do have the Austin and Stackpole ones that are very good.
I would also say that if you look at the breakdown, I only had to cut out 2 of the 5 or 6 plot lines that form this book to focus on characters who are introduced and primarily associated with the X-Wing series. So in this case, well, we'll go through them, but briefly, it's Gavin Darklighter, Corran Horn, then our new X-Wing style characters like Admiral Crafey, Jaina Solo, and the other new rogues. There's also a heavy emphasis on good starfighter action. There was some starfighter action in Vector Prime, but it was much more Jedi focused than military. There's not really any named military pilots in that book, whereas in this one, Rogue Squadron and Crafey's battle group are huge organizational pieces of the plot.
Yeah. The difference of opinions between Corran and Kip, who's not present, but Ganner is, dates back to iJedi, and this also continues some of iJedi's questions about how to use the Force, although that's primarily in the Mara and Anakin section.
The whole book, of course, is worth reading, but since this is an X-Wing podcast, we've made the decision to focus on the X-Wing parts, and it's a majority of the book. Now, why did we decide to call this Season 2? Well, part of that is because it made for a reason to have a break after Union, so we could have the summer to do normal summary stuff and travel. And this is a new starting point. And it's the first Stackpole book in the New Jedi Order, and is the start of a brand new threat. So we're not fighting Imperial warlords or the Imperial Remnant, like the first 9 books of the X-Wing series do, were fighting the Yuuzhan Vong. Now, who are the Yuuzhan Vong? They are, of course, an extragalactic, that is, they come from outside the Star Wars galaxy, threat, an alien species that hates and rejects normal human style technology that's, metal and glass and transistors and silicon, but they engineer things out of coral, and they have a lot of animals, like a snake that turns into a sword/spear called an amphistaff, and they have bugs that explode instead of grenades. So all these things, they have equivalents of most human style technology, but they're formed out of animals. In the X-Wing world, some of the big things to know are the main enemy are going to be these ships grown out of coral, Yorick coral, called coral skippers, or skips, as we mentioned. And they are driven by 2 engine equivalents. And those are organisms or organs called Dovin basals, which manipulate gravity. So they can pull or push away from gravity wells, like a planet or moon. And they can also create miniature black holes that suck in laser and proton torpedoes. Using enough energy to suck in lasers or proton torpedoes exhausts the Dovin basals, which allows the X-Wings and other New Republic starfighters to overwhelm them and get through the shields. So it has a somewhat similar effect to like getting down the shields of a fighter in one of the Star Wars video games, but the mechanism is this organic gravity manipulation technology. The most famous use of the gravity technology, of course, is in Vector Prime, when they get a really big, like a house-sized Dovin basal, and they drag the moon of a planet onto the planet, which then explodes and kills Chewbacca. So, do you think that's a decent summary of the Vong, or do you want to add a few things before we get to our next point, Wraith?
We do. This will be relevant for the next book. They it might not be labeled as an epilogue, I forget, but the sort of epilogue-esque sequence at the end of Dark Tide 1 has the leader of the currently attacking Vong group hearing a report about what happened to the 2 dead Vong that Corran killed toward the end of the book, and the other bodies they found. Specifically, if I'm remembering right, that they'd been scanned by the research team, which, given the Vong's beliefs about machinery and that being wrong, for lack of a better word, that's a grave insult to these 2 ancestors of the guy leading the attacking force, which will be relevant come next book.
Yeah. So that epilogue and the last scene with Corran talking to Luke about the Vong bodies are very much pointing forward rather than tying off this first conflict of Dantooine.
Yeah, they have a lot of cultural practices that they're questioning why the people of this galaxy didn't follow, but they would not have any way to know that.
All right, so now we have our huge news that you discovered. So why don't you take it away?
Yeah, so when I was reading about some of the parts from the initial parts from Krife's point of view, he thinks about how he was trained not on Botha-Wee, but on one of the other Bothan planets by an instructor who had differing views about Bothan culture. Now, if you remember from Isar's Revenge, spoilers for that, Asir Sylar, who had been Gavin's fiance, essentially, they were going to marry and adopt kids, died, or so it was believed, at Disna in the Chrono campaign, but it's revealed in the course of that book that she had in fact survived and asked that her survival be hidden from everyone, including Gavin, so that she could take on a new identity and try to reform Bothan culture from the inside. So when I'm reading this section, and I don't even remember if it had a pronoun. Yeah,
No pronoun.
it doesn't. But just the way it was talking about this unnamed instructor, and this is actually in Trace speaking to Gavin, who pointed out certain flaws in the way Bothan society functions. It made me wonder, could that be a seer under her new name? So then, since Wedge is on Blue Sky and I am not, and Michael Stackpole is on Blue Sky, you asked him about that, and do you want to give his response since he got it to you, or do you want me to read it?
Yeah, I'll read it. He said, "Would I put that sort of Easter egg in a book? I do believe that this is the first time that particular question has been asked of me. Well spotted."
So it puts a lot of new meaning on I Search Revenge because we actually get to know what Isir did after her fake death, and Krife's actions are very pivotal in this book, and I don't think it's much of a spoiler to say it'll be important going forward. So, yeah, it definitely adds. Still unfortunate that Isir had to fake her death, but at least it paid off for the sake of the galaxy.
For
Because without
years,
Krife, this book goes very differently.
Yes. For 26 years, we thought that this was a dangling plot thread that Stackpole, who never got a chance to write any more after the New Jedi Order for this time period. He did write one Clone Wars story, but he never got back to the X-Wing characters. We thought that he originally wanted to do more. And I'm sure that if he'd gotten more novels, he could have, of course, written more about Isir. But this is a payoff. And this is a payoff that apparently no one's asked Stackpole about in 25 years. So that's incredibly exciting. And to me, it makes it so much more satisfying because Ice Heart's Revenge is so sad that Isir leaves Gavin. But to know that she influences Krayfe, and then Krayfe not only seeks out Gavin, which I would guess Isir told Trask about Gavin and what a good man and what a good leader and what a good pilot he was. So Trask would seek him out and ally with Rogue Squadron, which puts him connected to the Jedi and has all these positive relationships with the X-Wing characters. But it also means that he directly challenges Borsk Phalia multiple times in this book and the next book, but we're focusing on this book. He basically says, Borsk, if you as a Bothan play Bothan-style politics with the New Republic, and you're just like, I'm going to seek my own power, I don't care what threatens my citizens. If you don't seek the greater good for the New Republic, I'm going to take control of as much of the New Republic fleet as I can, which is a lot because he's very brilliant and very talented. And I'm going to take them and make my own mini republic or mini empire. And that forces, he's able to use Borsk's Bothan fear of rivals to force Borsk to cooperate with Leia and with the Jedi to treat the Vong like the very dangerous threat that they are.
And if you look at the end of the book, for how the Battle of Dantooine is going, without Krife showing up, essentially against orders, Leia dies, Luke dies, Mara dies, Jaina dies, Gavin dies, all the rest of the Rogue Squadron still alive, they die, and no one gets word to the New Republic about what happened. So it can be covered up.
So that small ripple effect of what happened at the end of Ice Heart's Revenge has a huge impact on the shape of the New Jedi Order plotline, and it's great.
Oh, and Anakin and Jason, they die too.
Yes, basically the entire Solo family except Han dies.
Which would be really bad for Han. He might not make it if that happened, but yeah. So do you want to talk about Gavin, for our first character update.
Yeah, so we're going to go through our old Rogue Squadron characters, and then we'll get to our new ones introduced in this book. Our first one, of course, is Gavin Darklighter, the new commander. Well, new, he's been in command for about 5 years, since the end of Vision of the Future. The commander of the Rogues, he's married to a woman named Sarah Failer, who's a social worker, who I still think must be related to Reyna Failer, the quartermaster who dated Wedge in mandatory retirement. Even though Stackpole doesn't remember doing that. We tweeted him a couple years ago about this. He doesn't remember doing that, but I feel like those names are really close to each other to not be cousins or sisters or something.
I mean, they are the same last name, and it's not Antilles, so they're probably related.
Gavin has 2 adopted boys that were kind of orphaned after the Thrawn and Dark Empire crisis with all the devastation on Coruscant. And then with Sarah, he has 2 daughters and a son that were born after their marriage. There are hints of a darker, less happy time after his children were born. We did ask Stackpole about this too, and he kind of said, hey, different plans. But I personally think it's really because his sister lives with him on Coruscant, and her husband was killed in the Yavathan War of the Black Fleet crisis. So that kind of is a sad thing, and I would say that's probably the darker time that he's talking about. I don't get a sense that he's certainly not divorced, like he's still got all his kids, so I don't think it's too dark. I think it's just kind of some sadness brought on by the various conflicts in the New Republic.
And he's not had to recruit any of his own children.
Yes. Well, let me think. If this is only Strong Trilogy.
Not that we know of, anyway.
Well, no, actually, you're right. If the boys he adopted were... because it's 15 years between the Thrawn trilogy and this book. And so it's possible his 2 adopted sons are around 20.
Yeah, for the viewers, I was just referencing someone from the novel Mercy Kill.
Yes, which I am, as always, thrilled to and excited to get to, but that's, I want to say 6 books. Let me think.
It's several books down the road.
There's about 7 books from where we are now.
Several, yeah.
But it's a great book. Everyone should read it. He also has been working closely with Admiral Crayfay to hunt pirates in the Outer Rim. So there's a strong sense, both with what Kip Duran's doing in Vector Prime with his Starfighter Squadron that hunts pirates, and what the Rogues are doing, that it seems like in the 5 years after peace with the Empire, there's a ton of pirate activity, and that's been the primary focus of the military since then. And we kind of get a glimpse of that with the prologue, with that pirate captain who has his own Nebulon B frigate. Like, that's a pretty hefty ship. And I would say Rogue Squadron facing a Nebulon B by itself would have its work cut out. Now, facing a Nebulon B with a Bothan assault cruiser, which is basically about the size of a Victory Star Destroyer, but much more heavily armed, my guess is it's probably supposed to be comparable to a Nebula-class Star Destroyer, which, again, is about 1,000 meters long, and just incredibly heavily armed. My guess is a Bothan assault cruiser is really formidable, and could have easily destroyed a Nebulon B, which I think is, I want to say the Nebulons are only like 400 to 500 meters long. They're not that big, comparable.
Could be an interesting setup, not seen here, but kind of hinted at, where the New Republic has to defend Imperial remnant ships against pirate attack.
Yes. Well, we'll get much more into the politics between the 2 nations, the Imperial Remnant and the New Republic, in our next book, which will be very exciting.
Yes.
A last comment about Gavin is that if you remember back in Back to War, his astromech was named Jawa Swag. But in this book, he has the same astromech, but he's renamed it Catch, because there's this whole adventure where Jawas actually did try and capture the astromech, and he fought them off. So Gavin was like, you deserve a better name, so he calls him Catch.
Yeah. Corin Horn, who is not the singular protagonist here, retired and became a full-time Jedi with now 2 children, Valen and Gisela. He is a close ally to Luke in the Jedi political struggles, but opposed to Kip Duran and his younger generation of more arrogant, quicker to use the Force for power Jedi, which when Luke is telling Corran to go work with Ganner, he kind of chides him about that rivalry. Ganner, being the Kip disciple, especially gets under Corran's skin, and somewhat vice versa, arguing with him about his actions in Jedi fighting the pirates as Jedi Batman, essentially.
Yeah, I really like Corran in this book. He's still kind of got that ego problem that makes him kind of a flawed character, but he's much more mature. He has it feels like he has matured in the 13 to 14 years since I Jedi, where he was the focus of the character. He was pretty mature in Hand of Thrawn, but he wasn't fully Jedi like he is here. So I really like how Stackpole progressed him to this point. And even though he's not the main character of this 2-book series, he's definitely one of the main characters.
Yeah.
We also have Elagos Akla from I Jedi and also Hand of Thrawn. He's now a New Republic senator, a pacifist who nonetheless believes that peace can only be achieved through defense of the helpless. He has some very nice scenes demonstrating Kamasi wisdom with Han, who's really struggling with the death of Chewbacca.
Yeah. Then there's also, returning from the X-Wing books, Major Inuri Forge, younger sister, of Yuuzhan, who died in Rogue Squadron. So yeah, she'd been in Wedge's Gamble, Krytos Trap, and the Back to War, appears in Solo Command as one of the rogues, and then with how the books were being written, she didn't really reappear again since the stuff was written by other authors, but here we see she's still in the squadron as the other one of the kind of originals with Gavin of Rogue Squadron circa 6 ABY.
And she is now Rogue 5, the leader of Two Flight. So she is probably functionally second in command of the unit. Wedge, Antilles, and Tycho Selchu are both retired for this book, but we do see them in a very nice flashback where they give responsibility of the squadron to Gavin. They give him a lot of wise advice, encouragement, and a very cool Rogue Squadron ring. And then, of course, they show up at the end. They invade his office and disarm his guard as they're preparing to lend their services to fight the Vong.
Yeah, Wedge has a line that doesn't hold up in the rest of the series about how he's too old to fly now, but he can still offer tactical advice. Yeah, he's going to end up back in an X-Wing. Don't worry.
I'm trying to think, how old is Wedge at this point? He'd
be under 50.
He's definitely under 50. I want to say he's
like late 40s, I think.
So he was 28 in Wraith Squadron, right?
Yeah.
And Wraith Squadron's about a year before Thrawn Trilogy. So let's say he's 29 in Thrawn Trilogy. And then we add 15. So that means he's 44. So he's actually in his lower 40s at this stage of the Vong War. The Vong War does last 5 years, so he would be about 49 by the end of the war. But at this stage, he's still under 45. And Tycho, I want to say, is only a few months either way of Wedge. He's either a little bit older or a little bit younger, but he's going to be around the same age. But of course, as Corran and Luke joke, in terms of life events, they're all in their centuries.
Yep. So for new characters, we have, as we've talked about, Krife, who's deliberately subverting the way most Bothans not named Asir were seen in the X-Wing series, particularly his grandfather, Laren, who fumbled the first battle of Borlaeus very badly and got himself killed in the process. And so Krife rebels against the Bothan Orthodoxy, including his own relative, Borsk.
Yeah, he's a very cool character. I'm really glad because I feel like I definitely understand why Zahn set up the Bothans the way he did and why Stackpole kind of followed his lead, but I feel like we needed more characters like Asir and Trast earlier because I have an affection for the Bothans. I think they're a cool species, but a lot of people come into the expanded universe and are like, man, all Bothans are like Borskvalia, they all suck. And I'm like, but they're not. So I'm really glad that Trast is such a cool character.
Yeah, there's a scene when he's arguing with Borsk where they just start talking in their own Bothan language, snapping at each other. And it would have been really funny if Gavin, from his time with the Seer, had known enough to understand what they were saying.
I mean, we don't know that he didn't.
Well, I think it's from his point of view, so.
Right, but it doesn't say he didn't know. It just says that it was in the Bothan language.
Yeah, he just didn't share it with us, the readers. He should have.
Next, we have Major Aelin Varth, who's Rogue 9, our leader of 3 Flight. She's likely connected to Commander Varth, who was mentioned in the Rogue Squadron and I think the Thrawn trilogy. But it's never mentioned exactly how she's connected. A lot of people, including myself, kind of assume she's Commander Varth's daughter. But of course, she could be a niece or even a much younger sister.
Yeah, Thrawn trilogy suggests Varth died in one of those battles, but it's not confirmed.
Against Thrawn, yeah.
And then there's Captain Crow Neville, a Quarren who is Gavin's wingman. And I'm not even sure if we know whether Gavin's following the Wedge tradition of make the least experienced guy the leader's wingman or not. I mean, technically that would be Jaina, but she's Jaina.
I think it's very unlikely because he is a captain, which means that he's
that too.
3 ranks up from flight officer, and probably could technically command his own squadron. I like the fact that Rogue Squadron is, once again, really stacked with high-ranking officers. You got a colonel in charge, 2 majors, and a captain, plus a couple lieutenants and flight officers. An elite unit like the Rogues probably should have people who are very high performing. And I believe Carl Neville, I want to say he becomes rogue leader at one point, but I could be wrong. So don't quote me on that.
Yeah. It's just basically we have few names for the rogues and a lot of completely unnamed ones die.
Well, we do have a Lieutenant Lig Panet, who's a Krish female, who's mentioned as that species likes playing games. So she kind of dances around in her X-Wing. And even though that's only a simple sentence, I did kind of like that you get that hint of personality and species and variety in the pilots, even though later, of course, she has to be dead because only 6 rogues survive, and we know who all those are.
Right. Do you want me to talk about Jaina?
Go for Jaina.
Yeah, becomes a flight officer she's 17 at that point, I think.
I want to say she's still 16.
16, okay.
This is only like a month or 2 after Vector Prime where they explicitly say she's 16. So she is the exact same age as Gavin when he joined Rogue Squadron.
Which I think Leia throws in his face when he's reluctant to bring Jaina on.
Yes, she does.
And yeah, she gets the call sign Styx and has an astromech named Sparky. Styx is obviously there's the Jedi What's the other meaning? Remind me.
The joystick.
Oh yeah, yeah. When I was reading, it was partly on the plane, so memory over the last month was a bit of a challenge.
Which is why we decided to do every other month.
Yeah.
Our last named rogue is Flight Officer Annie Capstan. She joins from Lando's system of Debrilliant, so she's probably connected to mining operations. And she's Rogue 12, Jaina's wingmate. She knows enough to follow Jaina in her run on the giant warship and does some damage. So she's a clever pilot, but not necessarily a leader. We don't get a ton more information on her in this book, but we will get more on her next book. So tune in for more on Annie Capstan. Now, let's get into some of the wider, more thematic discussions about the book. One of which is, whenever you see some people talking about how the old expanded universe was terrible, they talk about how Luke Skywalker moves a black hole. And this is the book in which that happens, but it is disingenuous and, in my opinion, misleading to say that Luke moves a black hole. The thing that he moves is a miniature black hole that we call a void, which is already movable. It's not like a black hole that creates this massive gravity well in space after an exploding star collapses in on itself. This is a gravity well created by the Yuuzhan Vong creature, the Dovin Basal. And so it's already moving around to block incoming lasers and stuff. And so what Luke does is he tricks it into moving one direction, and he kind of does that thing where you arm wrestle and you're like going really hard, so they're pushing really hard, and then you let go and they over push. So he kind of pushes against it and then he lets go, and he's able to push it with its own force onto the ground vehicle, which sucks up the vehicle and a chunk of the fighters and vehicles around it. So it is, again, disingenuous and misleading to say that Luke just moves a collapsed star. That's not what happens. He moves an already movable phenomenon created
Such
by
an object.
what?
Isn't it like a living object too?
Well, the void itself is not living,
Okay.
but the Dovin Basal that creates it is living. So he tricks it.
Yeah.
And also, it does wipe him out. The amount of force power required basically means he has to go into a healing trance to recover. So it's not easy, and it's not like he's just going around waving his hand and a black hole moves, which I think is what people are trying to get you to think. That is not the case. Although I will say, there are some things in the Tales of the Jedi comics where, like, a Sith Lord waves his hand and a sun explodes. So I'm not saying that there aren't some silly things that happen. This is not one of them, and people who say so are clearly, in my opinion, being misleading and disingenuous.
So we also had some notes about how the novel is rotating between different characters until most of them collapse into one plot line, with all roads leading to Dantooine. Yes, the place that was the Rebels' military base, supposedly, in A New Hope.
Which Leia mentions, as she thinks if Tarkin had taken the bait, there would be no Dantooine. I liked that. It's kind of fun to see the world of Dantooine after, if you've seen Star Wars, you're like, what's Dantooine? We've never been there, but they mention it. Now we know. I really like this structure where it's kind of like you just keep going through all the different plot lines as they progress, and then they slowly all converge. And it's really kind of satisfying how it's all like interlacing into this big battle at Dantooine.
Yeah, it's sort of like Helm's Deep in Lord of the Rings.
Sort of like Helm's Deep, or Timothy Zahn's a master of this. You see this in both Dark Force Rising and Last Command and Vision of the Future, where he has 4 or 5 different plot lines all converging into one space, and they all interact with each other.
Yeah.
there is a question of why is Corrin's plotline important? Because he doesn't go to Dantooine. That, of course, is, as the epilogue hints, because it's important for the next book.
Yeah. Yeah, we don't really get a point of view from the enemy outside of the epilogue. Up till that point, there's no named Yuuzhan Vong characters, which I think works because the whole initial point of the New Republic's mission is to find out more about the Vong, and because they know very little, it's not like they're going to have direct communication ship to ship with them, so it's just all about their battle capabilities in a very impersonal way.
Yeah,
how do they fight? How do we beat them? Either in an X-wing or in lightsaber versus amphistaff combat.
Yeah, there's a very interesting. This is an alien invasion series, so it's going to have a lot of similarities with your classic alien invasion novels like War of the Worlds or The Kraken Wakes, where for a lot of those books, there's no direct contact between the enemy and our protagonists. Unlike, of course, the Empire versus New Republic or Rebel Alliance conflicts that dominate most of the original X-Wing books, because, of course, the Empire used to be the galactic government. So everyone who is a rebel now was at one point an Imperial citizen, and there's lots of rebel spies in Imperial territory, whereas it's nearly impossible to get a human spy or even some other alien like a Duros or a Mon Calamari into the Vong, because the Vong just look different, and so they would recognize it.
This is more a plot line for the Mara and Anakin and the Leia sections on the ground, but the Yuuzhan Vong do not have that limitation because they have creatures that can make them appear to be any species and have been infiltrating the galaxy in that way.
Yeah, kind of like a Mission Impossible mask maker, but organic. So they can basically look like any human. At this point, we only know about humans. Um, Later on, we find out they have been able to replicate other species, but we're not reading those books.
Yeah, Vector Prime, the one novel set before this, had some details from Yuuzhan Vong points of view as well.
Yeah.
So readers of the overall series would know some things about the Vong.
Do you feel that someone could start the New Jedi Order series here with Onslaught? Or do you think that would be too confusing?
I mean, it gives enough details on the story so far that they probably could. I think Vector Prime would be worth the read, especially given how one of its main people, if they were going to read all of New Jedi Order, I would say read Vector Prime first. If they were going to read just Dark Tide, books 1 and 2, and the Enemy Lines duology, those could be right on their own, I think.
Yeah. I think that Stackpole has this idea that he tries to make this not necessarily standalone, but in case you missed Vector Prime, he gives you all the information you need. You won't have experienced that adventure, but you don't necessarily feel like you're completely lost if you start with this book.
Yeah, you know the basics of what was going on with Jenny Kui, for instance, who we haven't talked about late on in this, but she'll come up more in Enemy Lines.
Yes. How would you compare this to the first season of X-Wing?
It's a bit broader in terms of how it's part of a 19 book series, so Stackpole is referencing the stuff from Vector Prime, as opposed to how Rogue Squadron was mainly just footnotes from like old West End Games material like Harkness. And what's the other one I was thinking of? Varth. I think he's from the Thrawn trilogy source book. Varth, amusingly, Commander Varth, the one, not Aelin, the original one, never actually appears in person in any books.
I think you're absolutely right. This has a broader scope because it's a galaxy invasion rather than a targeted attack on Coruscant and then of course Isard. I like the fact that it's much more of an ensemble book. You don't have Corran dominating the entire arc. Corran is, of course, a main character, but I would say that Jaina, Luke, Jason, Anakin, and Gavin are all at least as important as Corran and have at least as important things to do and learn.
Yeah. And in, I think, pretty much all the X-Wing books, the New Republic is setting the operational tempo where it's their offensive and they are, either going after Coruscant or they're going after Isard on their own, or they're going after Zinj or Krenel, or Wedge has been sent to Adamar with incomplete mission parameters. But here, it's very much defensive action, pulling back from multiple worlds. As you mentioned, to collapse on Dantooine and try to hold it, where they're very much on the back foot.
Yes, this is constantly retreating. None of the battles in this book are trying to push the Vong back. They're just trying to survive long enough to get as many population off of the planets that the Vong are taking as possible.
Yeah, and
which is why this is called Onslaught, of course.
Yeah.
That's what this book is.
One thing we see with the ground attack, which we didn't go into, the full nitty-gritty of it, and a lot of it is Jedi combat with Jason and Anakin, is the Vong are using kind of slave troops who are of this galaxy as the sacrificial first wave. So that's part of what makes these refugees so important, is they can be compelled to be enemy troops if they aren't evacuated.
If you leave a lot of civilians on a planet, they become enslaved suicide troops, which may not necessarily be hard to defeat, but number one, they're your people, so you just lost a bunch of your people, and number two, their bodies in front of the Vong, so they're extra shields, extra weapons against you, and that so it's a real incentive to try and prevent them from taking as many people as possible.
But the disincentive is the refugees, and this will come up more later, they have to be housed, fed, and all of that is not something that the New Republic Council wants to deal with as much.
Well, it's we're talking about entire planets. Now, these aren't necessarily core planets where we're talking trillions of people, like on Coruscant, but we are talking about millions of people, let alone maybe billions of people, who have to be moved. And we're not going to cover this novel directly, but the novel Balance Point by Kathy Tyers, who also wrote, of course, the classic Bantam book, Truce at Bakura, that's literally all about the refugee crisis and how the Jedi and Han and Leia and Luke are trying to deal with that, as well as the looming threat of the Vong continuing to advance. One thing I do like about this book compared to some of the Stackpole's X-Wing books is I feel like a lot of the X-Wing characters were red shirts, to borrow Star Trek terminology. They're just there to get killed, so you're like, oh, this is war, there's casualties. But they don't really have personality or relationships, and you don't care about it. Whereas Stackpole takes I think maybe even borrows some of Alston's thing where he will put a little thought into what a character's flavor is. They'll give them flavor in just a couple lines. That means when they die, you're like, oh, that flavor's gone. So you don't have a full relationship with that character, but it's not a red shirt like Riv Shield or Lures a Talk, or who's the Quarren that you wrote in your fic?
Yes.
Or was that Lure?
Yes, that was her.
So there's the other guy.
Dazzling Star's Revenge, or I forget his Kijin's Flea.
Yeah, the egg guy. Now the egg guy I do remember for that, but he's not really a character. He's kind of an alien species representative.
Right.
And I guess you could say the same thing for like Lieutenant Panat, who's the species that likes playing games. But there's something kind of poignant about she likes to play games and she's a casualty of this brutal war. Like, I don't know, that just kind of sticks in my head as I was going through the book. Now, as Wraith mentioned, the cover of this book and the cover of the next book are both by famous artist John Harris. John Harris is probably best known for his work on the Ender's Game series. He also did work for the Old Man's War series and the Ancillary Justice series. The original art used for the Ender's Game novel, which was actually also used for a different novel before that, but it's very much known for Ender's Game over anything else, was just sold this last year for $500,000, which is 10 times what they expected it to sell. Speaking of Ender's Game, the prequel series to that novel, which is called The Formic Wars, features a pirate plotline that really reminded me of the opening pirates in this book. In fact, I read this book first in 2000, and when those prequels came out in like 2017, 2008, actually no, it was like 2012, 2013, so about 10 to 12 years later, the pirate plotline in that really reminded me of the Dark Tide series, and I was like, deja vu. But it wasn't deja vu, it was just a similar alien invasion plotline with pirates. All right. Any last comments about Dark Tide 1 Onslaught?
Not really.
Okay. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I really like this. I think it's quite fun. It's a bit more violent. There is a sense that the New Jedi Order has more graphic violence, a lot more blood mentioned. But I would say Stackpole actually had a fair amount of violence in the X-Wing books as well. He wanted to really get the idea that this is military fiction and there are consequences. It's not neat, but it is messy and there's a human cost.
And they're not using weapons that cauterize instantly.
Yes, the amphisasts and the slicer bugs, they cut like a knife. So let's move to our wing book section. I have too many books, unfortunately. I'm just trying to get through all the books that I like that connect to this book. So our first one is the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner, which has a slow realization of oncoming disaster. A lot of the same kind of deep character themes with philosophical and supernatural and spiritual things, similar to what Stackpole does with the Force in this book. A lot of powerful emotions. So definitely recommend that the Queen's Thief series. First book in the series is called The Thief. There's a new book in a series that I previously recommended, the Spiral Wars series. This is by Australian author Joel Shepherd. And the new book is called Precursor, which is all about an alien invasion. So it fits right in with Dark Tide Onslaught.
Yeah. And potential heresy for a Star Wars podcast, but mine would be the TV series Star Trek Deep Space Nine, which a bit of an oversimplification, but that also has invasion by an out of the known space area group that has dynamics similar to the Vong.
Yeah. So I definitely think that Deep Space Nine, I think by reputation, is one of the first first Star Trek TV shows that had a really ongoing plot line. So whereas the original series and Next Generation were much more episodic, and they had maybe some recurring villains, but it was mostly like two-parters or something. Deep Space Nine kind of developed into this big, like, multi-season arc of this war that I would say is comparable to the 19 books of the New Jedi Order.
And this was both like 1990s material.
Yes. Next time, we will be reading Dark Tide 2, Ruin, again, by Michael A. Stackpole. It will be our sad farewell to Michael Stackpole, and we'll talk more about all the characters we discovered in this book and some new characters, including the enemy, and maybe some returning old characters that we didn't see in Onslaught. In the meantime, I've been Wedge.
And I've been Red14.
Thanks so much for listening, and keep your books locked in reading position.